everyone. I'm Rebecca Crook-Stratton, and I'm here with a special edition of our podcast. For this episode, I was on site at the recent Educator Academy our tribe hosted as part of our Understand Native Minnesota campaign. It was a day filled with professional development workshops, introducing K-12 educators to different ways of teaching Native American topics. Nearly 300 educators and administrators attended. We had many amazing speakers, including Native authors, artists, and education experts. I connected with a handful of these speakers between sessions to talk about engaging students on Native education topics. These folks had a lot of great takeaways, and I think they will be helpful to not only educators, but parents as well as we begin a new school year. I hope you enjoy today's episode. I'm here with Tori Campbell from the Prairie Island Indian Community. We're here at the Educators Academy. Tori, you're an educator, and you're here to present and talk a little bit about our bison relatives.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your background in education?
Yeah, my background in education, I actually went to school for something totally different. I wanted to own a restaurant and be a chef. I still have a passion for that. But when I had my kids, I noticed the discrepancies with Indian education in the systems here. I didn't go to school systems here. I grew up in the South. So I wanted to make sure that my kids were getting the proper things that I wasn't receiving and didn't receive when we were younger.
The education here in the state of Minnesota, well, we get, high ratings. The content and the perspective and the narrative isn't always very diverse.
Correct.
So I've noticed that in my children's education too.
Yeah.
Well, so what are some of the work you're doing to try to change that narrative and offer a new perspective?
Some of the things I'm specifically doing myself is making sure that Dakota language is accessible to the little kids that I work with. I specifically have it all over the walls, and I'm trying to use the language as much as I can, and as well as enforcing and reinforcing some of those traditions that we can within the school, little things that are acceptable. We do have our own smudging policies and things like that in Red Wing. So I get lucky that I can bring those things to teach the kids, oh, hey, let's step outside, take a break. We're going to go smudge down for a minute. I think you need a second to cool off, things like that. And just making sure that even when I am doing academics, that I am trying to pull those little pieces of our morals and traditions and our virtues as well.
So do you have any advice for, teachers in our mainstream K through 12 about maybe how to be more comfortable or to access resources to teach a more diverse perspective about Native Americans?
I would say my best advice would be to ask, not to be afraid to ask, not to be afraid to reach out. If you have a student in your classroom, ask that parent. Maybe they're willing to come in and help you out, or just a quick email, see if it's appropriate, or if you have a parent committee, definitely reach out, or your liaisons, whoever you have, or whatever is accessible to you if you're near a community or whatever you might have access to definitely ask those questions, because they're not always easy questions. And most people are willing to, okay, I'll show you. So
yeah, I think that's great advice. Don't be afraid to ask.
Not be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm here with Darlene St. Clair. Darlene, thank you so much for joining us at the Educators Academy today. You are a presenter here, but you also run a wonderful teacher training program in Nisswa? Yeah, in the summers. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about your experience and why we need these training programs?
Yeah. So, by the way, thank you, Mdewakanton, for inviting me to talk with you about these issues. They're so close to my heart. It's really where I'm investing so much of my energy. The Native Studies Summer Workshop for Educators, NSWA, is kind of a 1-week workshop where teachers or educators broadly defined can learn about Native people in Native communities. I think that is just that change in location and space kind of opens up opportunities for educators. So I've been doing this since 2008. So I've been going around to Native nations and Native communities around Minnesota for all that time and developing these relationships. So I now am so blessed to know folks in lots of different communities. I work with the tribe. The nation says they invite us in. We want you to come. We work with the government to make sure that we are invited. We ask them, how do you want your community to be understood by educators? And we work with community presenters, and they talk about the community in lots of different facets. But it is something we're talking about Native Nations of Minnesota, so we kind of start broadly, where we're talking about federal Indian policy, and really not just about how it affected Native people, but actually how it continues to affect the students in your classroom. So we're talking about that. We talk about arts and cultural expressions. We talk about elders, the roles of elders, and we talk about education more broadly defined. We think about the state of education in Minnesota and where we're at that time. So folks have like this really rich opportunity to see a community, but not from an outsider perspective. We see a community from the way the nation wants us to see the community, because they're like really co-developing the content. So we're there for a week and make connections. And then I make sure and let people know that the expectation is this is not just a filling your head with new experiences. This is about how you make a commitment to change your practice. Whether you're an administrator, whether you're a teacher, a professor, a paraprofessional, whatever you do, we expect that after the hosting of that community and how much that community is offered to you, that you are making a commitment to make change in your sphere. And that might be in your work, but I think it's also in people's personal lives as well. So it's an awesome opportunity. I've had people come multiple times because a session at Boys Fort and a session at Prairie Island, you learn many different things. These are communities with like rich and diverse histories. There certainly is things that are shared amongst the Native Nations of Minnesota, but people have different stories. So we're really about how do we empower the Native Nation to like tell their story in a way that they want educators to hear and understand.
Hi, Eden. How are you today?
Oh, good. Nice to see you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. We're here at the Educators Academy. You're with the Humanities Center. Can you tell us a little bit about the Humanities Center and the work you do there?
Yeah, so my name's Eden Bart. I'm a Humanities officer at the Humanities Center, and we do a lot of different kinds of work, but the work specifically that I'm here to talk about today is I'm going to be presenting a session on teaching American Indian content to all. And it's near and dear to my heart. As a former sixth grade teacher teaching Minnesota studies or Minnesota history back in the 90s, I was one of those teachers who I think, I perpetuated the invisibility of Native people unknowingly because I had so many gaps in my own education, and I had no access to really good resources at that time. And I was, like I think a lot of teachers, a little bit hesitant and afraid to maybe say the wrong thing, not understand the content. And so I'm so excited now that I've learned so much through my work at the Humanities Center, and I've met some amazing Dakota and Ojibwe people and have had access to incredible resources, some of which the Humanities Center has created. Now I get to share that with teachers today.
I'm really excited that this campaign has been well received, it seems, in every arena. And we've been fortunate to have some really great partners to help further this work. And the Humanities Center is one of those partners. Can you talk a little bit about some of the resources the Humanities Center has to offer educators?
Yeah, so in regards to specifically Dakota and Ojibwe resources, probably the biggest resource we have is this wonderful traveling exhibit, Why Treaties Matter, Self-Government in the Dakota and Ojibwe Nations. And this exhibit has been traveling the state for a number of years. It's on permanent display at the Minnesota State Capitol. And there's an accompanying website for anybody, but particularly educators, to come to treatiesmatter.org, where they can access all the content from the banners, video content, multiple lesson plans that provide background and activities to students. And so that's one very wonderful resource. We also have a variety of other video interview types of resources, some lesson plans. We take educators on experiences like Learning for Place at Dote, and provide resources to support that work. So that's just a sample of some of the resources.
Yeah, can you comment a little bit on why this work is so important?
Yeah, Minnesota history is very encompassing, and if we're only teaching one aspect of our history, we're leaving out so many people. And perpetuating this misunderstanding, invisibility. So we need to, all students, not just Native students learning about their own heritage background, but everybody needs to understand this important history, what's happening today. And as an educator, you don't necessarily know who's in your classroom. You don't know if you have Native students in your classroom necessarily. And so it's just important to make sure that you are teaching accurately, that you are reaching all of your students, and helping everybody be more, I guess, open and understanding about all the different communities that make up this place where we all live.
In this episode, I was able to speak with two fantastic Native authors, Art Colson and Tom Peacock. Art is a children's book author, writing books like The Creator's Game, about a young lacrosse player. His most recent book, Chasing Bigfoot, is a novel for middle schoolers about a boy connecting to his Cherokee heritage. You can learn more at artcolson.com. Tom is also an author, writing both nonfiction and fiction books. He and his wife own Black Bears and Blueberries Publishing, which focuses on creating and developing Native books written by Native authors and illustrated by Native artists. You can see their catalog at blackbearsandblueberries.com. Now back to our episode. I'm here with Tom Peacock, one of the vendors at our Educators Academy here at Mystic Lake Center. Tom, thanks so much for being with us. You and your wife own a publishing company, Black Bear and Blueberries Publishing.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be in the publishing business and maybe a little of your background?
Certainly. I'm a retired educator. Started my career as a teacher, and then I moved into administration. I was a high school principal and school superintendent, and then about 20 some odd years ago, went into higher ed, teaching at the University of Minnesota Duluth in the education department. So when we retired, we decided our way of giving back would be to start a publishing company and publish Native books. It's a very small niche with a small market, and we saw a need for getting those books out, sticking to the Midwest, and so with Lakota, Dakota, and Ojibwe primarily in the books that we publish.
So for educators, if you had to give them some advice about finding and sourcing good material, what would your advice be?
Well, many years ago when Minnesota had a state board of education, I was a member of that board. And I still ask the same question that I did way back then as a member of that board. I looked at it this way. There's one, what do we want Native kids to know, do, and understand when they graduate from a Minnesota school? That's the first question. And the second question is, what do we want all children to know, do, and understand about Native people when they graduate from the Minnesota school? And so that question is still pertinent today. And so the books that we publish, at least from my perspective, I'm still trying to answer those two questions.
All right, thanks so much for joining us here at the Educators Academy. You are an author. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yep. I'm a writer primarily for young audiences. I write books from everything from preschool picture books to more kids novels for high school kids with Native characters. Written books, stories that take place in our communities, and just really enjoy writing for young people, both Native young people and non-Native kids who need to learn a little bit more about us.
Fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about advice you have for teachers about teaching Native content? I know there's a hesitancy because sometimes they just don't feel equipped. What would you say to them?
There are so many resources available. The things that Shakopee Community is doing in Understand Native Minnesota, great resource. I mentioned American Indians in children's literature, but even in Minnesota, if you're in a school district that has an American Indian program, connecting with the staff of your American Indian program and the parents on your parent committee, they're great resources for letting you know what are appropriate books and what are not maybe some great books for your classroom. So I think that's a really good first step, is just getting connected with that program. But I always hope that educators and their students leave with, when I go on a school visit or when I attend a conference like this, think of us in the present tense and also think of our future. Don't always think of us in the past tense. When I was a kid and I was learning in school, that one paragraph in the social studies book about the Trail of Tears we always had, that is not who we are as Cherokee people in our totality. I mean, it's something that happened, something that we, participated in and, had a big effect on us. But we're more than that. We're here today, and we have a bright future as well. We want to provide a future for our kids and our grandkids and their kids, just as everybody else does. So I really just want people to stop just talking about us in the past tense.
All right. I'm here with Tony Drews. Tony, thanks so much for joining us today. You're one of our presenters here at the Educator Academy, and you have one of the more fun, interactive presentations. Tell us a little bit about the educational games you've developed.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We have developed a whole catalog of games inspired with Ojibwe language and culture. We have 3 reimagined traditional games. Just by playing those games, you're embedding yourself in our culture and language. There's not a need to learn about it because you're just doing it. And then we have a catalog of games that are contemporary, that are based with the Ojibwe language and culture. And all of our games are meant to be the catalyst to talk about language and culture. I was working in Indian education with some of our suburban natives and trying to teach them their language and culture through the resources that are out there now. It really wasn't going anywhere. And one day I had a moccasin game at home and I brought it in for no reason, just for exposure. And I seen the interest and the questions. And at that moment I was like, I got to figure out a way to capture this every day. So that's kind of where we got our start.
Before we wrap up here, can you tell us a little bit more about your company and maybe some of the other work that goes along with it?
Definitely. Our Native youth are our priority. We donate over 50% of our profits back into the community in the forms of scholarships and other community investments. We've helped some local powwows with some seed money. We've given out $4,000 worth of scholarships this year alone. And the faster we grow and the more money that we get, the more scholarships and the more investments we'll be able to make.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your work supporting our Native communities.
Thank you for your work.
I'm here with James Vukelich. You have a pretty extensive background in Ojibwe language. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I can. Well, I suppose it's a traditional greeting would be good. Bonjour, Mdewakanton. Hello, all of my relatives. Kage Gabo Indigenous. My name is Kage Gabo. I'm also James Vukelich. I'm Turtle Clan. And I'm a descendant of Turtle Mountain Ojibwe.
And across the world, Indigenous languages are, disappearing at an alarming rate. Can you talk a little bit about, why it's so important for Indigenous people to preserve their languages?
When I first started learning the language, and this was 100% with every elder and fluent first language speaker I had a chance to talk to and learn from. They all agreed on this one point. If you want to know the history, the culture, the spirituality, the philosophy, it's all in the language. And in my talk, the 7 generations and the 7 grandfather teachings, we look at how there have been a number of teachings that are literally embedded in the words we use every day. And so if we lose those words, then those teachings are consigned to silence. And they don't need to be. They absolutely don't need to be. And they have things that they can share with us in where we're going in the future. I think these are incredibly important. And I think someone coming 7 generations from now deserves to hear these teachings just as much as we do.
Thank you for joining me for the Native Minnesota podcast. For more episodes, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also visit our website, understandnativemn.org, to learn more about our campaign's work to improve the Native narrative in Minnesota's public schools.